On this episode of At the Aga Khan Museum, Soheila Esfahani gives new meaning to an artist's palette.
I myself, as an immigrant, really experienced that in-betweenness of the cultures.
And the Mekaal Hassan Band blends sounds and talents from around the world. Hello, and welcome to At the Aga Khan Museum. I'm Amirali Alibhai. Soheila Esfahani recently staged one of the more arresting installations in our main gallery. It was big, and it exemplified one aspect of our mandate of pluralism. Esfahani explores cultural translation, especially when it comes to immigration. When you come from one place to another, you can belong to both and neither. Esfahani found the perfect visual metaphor for the idea of being in between, as she shows in this episode of our series, Art Lives.
I myself, as an immigrant, really experienced that in-betweenness of the cultures. And that feeling of not quite being here or there becomes more prevalent. My name is Soheila Esfahani. I am a visual artist and an assistant professor at Western University. This particular installation is 114 shipping pallets that are all numbered. So we're dealing with a giant 3D puzzle that needs to be sort of solved and put together. It was going to be installed in the middle of a permanent collection of art objects that are centuries old. So it was quite challenging to think that we have to get something done within like 8 hours. They're going to be positioned in a different way. Once you have 114 pallets in the middle of the gallery, it's not easy to undo that. I grew up in Iran and moved to Canada in 1992, so over 30 years. I got married. I was in first year university, and my husband wanted to study at University of Waterloo. So we decided to come here so he can pursue his studies. And I was also thinking that I would pursue my study too. I was very interested in Rumi's poems, so I had made a plexiglass box with the text engraved on the box. So for that critique day, I needed this box to be on some kind of a display or platform. One of my friends said, why don't you use the pallets that are outside of the building? So I went and grabbed the pallet and put the sculpture on top of the shipping pallet. And during that critique, we only talked about the shipping pallet. The shipping pallet became that object of translation, because it's an object that's in transit and it brings goods from one point to the next. I started looking into the etymology of the word translation, which means to carry across. And that idea of being a migrant and moving. I shifted that piece more in because of the gap. So when you look down, you see more of the design on that piece. So this door has been my inspiration. I replicated the geometric design exactly on my piece. I bring highly cultural motifs from my own background into the palettes and use various techniques from laser etching to stenciling and decorate these palettes, and usually in large stacks of palettes. Usually it's at least 20, 30, 40 palettes that I work on, and once I put the designs on, The pallets are displayed as an art installation. And then once the exhibition is over, I give the pallets back to the pallet company so they can be used as the shipping object. Part of the idea of cultural translation comes from how migrants live. So that idea of always living in an in-between space and never belonging to here or there is part of the story of these pallets. Within the cultural translation theories, that space is called a third space, the space of negotiations. It is a challenging space because negotiating culture, it's not an easy thing. But what comes out of this kind of a negotiation is hybridity. And what does it mean to be culturally hybrid? It's not the same as a car running on gas or electricity. Is something new coming from these two other things. And that newness is the act of cultural translation. I want people to start thinking about culture as something that is not dead in a museum, but something that is very thriving in today's society. Nobody can claim something as only theirs. We are bigger than that. We are connected more than that.
Take a good selfie. Aww.
Coming up a little later in the show, a performance by the musical group, the Mekaal Hassan Band. When Pakistani guitar virtuoso Mikal Hassen did a residency here at the Aga Khan Museum, he put together a new band. It was made up of local musicians, but with radically different backgrounds. I sat down to talk to two of them, guitarist Michael Murray from Thunder Bay in Northern Ontario, and singer Jaasmaan Rathore from Amritsar in India. We discussed the way this version of the Mekaal Hassan Band came together.
Hello, Mike. Hello, Jaasmaan.
Hello, nice to meet you.
It's nice to see you again, actually, because you've been working with Mikal Hassen for the last few days. This is one of the museum's residencies this year, and we're very excited that to be able to work with Mikal Hassen, but also to meet and work with other artists that he's brought together in this really incredible project. And I'd like to ask you a few questions about yourselves, about where, about your backgrounds and your training, and what it's been like working with Mikal in the last few days.
Of course.
Mike? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a guitarist, obviously. How I got connected with this is a little bit of an interesting thing. So my background musically, a lot of jazz fusion. When I discovered the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Shakti and John McLaughlin, a lot of that stuff, that was my stuff, And I living in Northern Ontario, I'm from Thunder Bay. It was my stuff and only my stuff, no one around was super into that. So over time, I got really interested in this kind of music, and especially like what Mikal does, like the kind of fusion with Western elements, which is obviously where I'm more familiar. And Jaasmaan, actually, we sort of connected online, I think, before we met in person. Yeah. And many years ago, he asked me to be part of a project of his, and it didn't work out. But as part of those discussions, he showed me Mikal's music, and so I kind of got into it that way. I do my own music as well. Like actually, the rhythm section tonight is just my band, and we do our own mostly instrumental, sort of jazz fusion, bringing elements of all sorts of stuff together. And yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. The story of how I met Mikal is also kind of interesting, but it's a little long, so I won't tell it unless you want me to.
Well, that whole Shakti Mahavishnu orchestra thing, that reference, I mean, it's a life changer for many musicians that I've met.
Oh, yes.
And it certainly was one for me as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And Jaasmaan, tell me a bit about your training and where you're coming from musically.
So basically, born, brought up in Punjab, Amritsar, India, throughout my life. I would say right when I was 22, which is like 6-7 years ago, I decided to move to this part of the world. But it's quite strange, even while growing up in Punjab, most of the music which I was consuming was coming from down south. Tamil music, Kannada music, lots of, Malayalam music coming. And I was that odd kid in the class who would be having all these, songs in my playlist. Whereas Mekal's music is more of a Punjabi folk and, progressive rock fusion happening. And it was happening just next to me, 30 kilometers away on the other side of the border in Lahore. But I discovered it quite late, I would say around 2016, sometime 2015, 2016. And I was taken aback. I'm like, this is such a beautiful music. And there were a couple of similarities I could derive from what I was listening to, the music from down south. And but still, it was very unique in a lot many ways. And I think that's when we got connected on Facebook. And that communication channel was open. Until last year, he just randomly throws me a message and he's like, hey, Jaasmaan, can you suggest me some good singers in North America? And I'm like, should I tell myself or not? Because, and very honestly, I suggested him a couple of singers who were my favorite. And in the third link, I sent my audio file. I didn't mention that it's me because I was like, I don't want to do self-publicity. And he's like, man, who's that third person? And that's how this whole thing happened.
That's very cool because there's two themes here. There's the technology, the online sort of connection that people are able to make in the contemporary world, but there's also this really amazing thing about you being from Thunder Bay, you being from Punjab, Mikal being from Pakistan, and we know that likely a collaboration between you and Mikal couldn't take place in either Pakistan or in India.
Sadly.
Right?
Yes.
But we're here. We're in Canada,
Yeah.
we're in Toronto, we're at the Aga Khan Museum, and it's possible to do this. And that was one of the reasons Mikal and I, when we started talking about this project, that was the objective. It was like, let's bring together musicians that normally, would not be able to work together and see what comes out of that. And you both have also mentioned the connection between folk and your training in jazz. Like, what sort of, do you have a folk tradition, Mike, that you...
Not really. I don't know. My position's kind of interesting. I tell the story about why I'm in Toronto doing music. It's because I didn't like living in Thunder Bay, and my other career path was going to be law. And the deal was basically, you have to get an undergraduate degree before you can attend law school, at least here. So the deal was I would have to stay in Thunder Bay and do undergraduate in like economics or something, and then go to Toronto to go to U of T Law School. And I was like, okay, no, I don't want to do that. Jazz guitar, you have to send me to Toronto, right? And that was it. That was the plan. So I don't come from like a particularly musical family. There's like a few members of my extended family that play classical music or something like that. But yeah, the folk tradition, no, there's just something about like the South Asian folk music traditions, all of them that like have always connected with me personally. But that was strictly a personal thing. I didn't have access to that. I discovered it sort of randomly, we mentioned Shakti earlier. I'm going to give all credit to the early days of the YouTube algorithm, actually, for that one. I got into guitar through the Rolling Stones, right? And somehow, in the early days, before it was monetized and before it was what it is now, it actually fed you sometimes some really interesting things. And eventually it showed me, I think it was Al Di Meola first, and then that led, do you know the guitar trio?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, Paco
Paco de
and,
Lucia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. It led me to that, and then, so I looked into all three of those guys, and I found Shakti, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? Like, this is the coolest thing. So yeah, my path to finding that music is a little odd. Like, I don't really have any particular reason other than I just heard it and I really liked it. And this, like I said earlier, this particular connection with Mikal is a little odd. Like, can I tell a story? It'll take a minute, but I think it's kind of interesting. So, like I said, Jaasmaan showed me the music. When was that, do you think?
2019, 2020.
Something like that, right? And so I listened to all of it, and I thought it was amazing, right? But that was the extent of it. in 2022, last year in May, so my mother was run over by a car. I had this particular incident. I promise this is relevant. So I woke up on a Saturday morning. I had COVID. I didn't know this at the time, but I just had awful symptoms. And I was supposed to meet my mother. Like, she was in town because I had just done an album release for my own music. And I was supposed to meet her and her partner for lunch. And I woke up with COVID symptoms. I was like, sorry, I can't meet you guys. So I left them a message saying, sorry, we're not going to be able to meet you. And no problem. That was probably at like 6:30 a.m. Then at 7:30 a.m., I got a phone call. She got hit. It was really bad. Like we thought she was dead, kind of thing. And so that was a bit of a whirlwind of a week. Like, my wife had to go stay in a hotel so she didn't get COVID because she was the only person allowed into the hospital to deal with this stuff, right? It was a whole thing. And after a few days of, I hired a lawyer. I kind of took care of all that sort of thing. I had nothing else to do. And so I had to just kill time until she came out of a coma. And one of the things I did was I went on Bandcamp and bought all of Mikal Hassan's music. And there was a prompt to leave him a message. And I just said, hey, this is some of my favorite stuff. Cheers from Canada. And he responded like right away. And I couldn't believe I actually had a line to this guy. So I sent him my music. And I was like, I'm not a hack. Like, I swear to God, I also play this kind of music. I love it. Let's talk. And then he was like, oh, I'm planning to come to Toronto and all this stuff. And, now we're actually here. And when he landed here, we had this conversation. It was like, it's like pretty crazy that all this happened. And again, I knew the music through him, but I didn't know that he was also forming a connection with him at the same time. And we kind of knew each other a little bit, but not a lot. So it's a very serendipitous moment, this concert tonight. It's like a lot of things had to come together.
Well, I'm really looking forward to your set later tonight. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you so much.
साजन प्रीत लगा के तो तेरे मत जा मत जा बस हमारे नगरे मोहे सुंदर मुख दिखला ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे मेरे लोनो चीख पुकार वे मेरे लोनो चीख पुकार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे मेरे लोनो चीख पुकार वे मेरे लोनो चीख पुकार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे मेरी जिंदगी मोई उदास में मेरा सावर आस न पास रे मेरी जिंदगी मोई उदास में मेरा सावर आस न पास रे मुझे मिलना चार कहार रे मुझे मिलना चार कहार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे मेरे लोनो चीख पुकार वे मेरे लोनो चीख पुकार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार वे ओ कदिया मिलता बल यार कुछ हर जाएगी बाहों में और प्यार मरीज की राहों में कुछ हर जाएगी राहों में और प्यार मरीज की राहों में मैं तो बैठी सब कुछ हार में मैं तो बैठी सब कुछ हार में हो कदियाँ मिल सावन यार में हो कदियाँ मिल सावन यार में मेरे दोनों चीख पुकार में मेरे दोनों चीख पुकार में हो कदियाँ मिल सावन यार में हो कदियाँ मिल सावन यार में
Thanks for watching at the Aga Khan Museum. The museum is in Toronto, but our work is worldwide. Please check out our stories and performances on our website, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. We want to be part of your lives. I'm Amirali Alibhai. We'll see you next time.